back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore. Today on the show we have Tom Hatsis. Tom is quite the interesting fellow. I think you're going to dig it. An intellectual, an occultist, a psychedelic user and advocate, and out of Portland, Oregon, that is, the more westerly Portland. So on the show, we get into a lot of stuff. In particular, we chat mostly about his new book about microdosing and magic. So this could be a little bit of a weird episode for some of you. So how do I describe this? So there's this tradition in the West of, they call it magic, and try, if you might, suspend your beliefs about it and consider it just a Western form of shamanism. There's a really long history of it in the West, and the reason we don't know about it is because we had a long history of repression. Think Spanish Inquisition, think global persecution of these kinds of ideas, both in Europe and abroad. Overseas, very long history of suppression of witchcraft and wizardry. The Vatican Church is still a little uncomfortable with Harry Potter. So, consider it, again, a Western form of shamanism. We're aware of it, shamanism generally speaking, from stuff like the ayahuasca traditions and iboga traditions. And there's, a lot of old religion looks more like magic than like the way we see most Christian churches operate, trying to influence outcomes in the future, stuff like that. So I think this is a great book. It's a really great idea. Why not merge two traditions if you can handle it? I read the book and had a great time reading it, self-published by Tom. Through a publishing company he's working to promote in Portland. And so Tom is also a coordinator at Sanctum Psychedelica, something along those lines, Psychedelica Sanctum. So a kind of alternative psychedelic club in Portland, Oregon. So check that out too. And we'll have links to it in the show notes. So I hope you enjoy this episode. If anything became alarming for you or was super interesting, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Hit us up, Psychedelics Today, email at gmail.com. You can also find us on social media, almost anywhere. So I hope you enjoy it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show we have Tom Hatsis. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on, Joe.
Absolutely. So I just had the opportunity to finish your book, Microdosing Magic. Is that the complete title, or is there more?
Microdosing Magic, a psychedelic spellbook.
Yeah. So for those listeners out there, I think most of you know that I have kind of a Western esoteric background. I've studied quite a bit of occultism and psychology because for a decent period of history, they overlapped quite a bit. So I spent a lot of time there and decided to wrap it up in order to study psychedelics. So this is kind of a nice overlap between those interest areas. And it was really cool to see what you did and the attitude you brought to it, because a lot of people bring this quite uptight attitude to writing anything psychedelic or magic oriented. And this, I think, did really well and was really playful.
I find it very difficult to take myself too seriously. So, and I mean, part of my magical system, what makes it actually work is not taking yourself too seriously and having, a childlike wonder, about what you do, and just having that curiosity you had at the age of, 5. So that's why I wanted it. I don't know how to write serious and be like that. I don't know.
Someday, right?
One day I will.
Great. So currently you're actually going around the country touring the book. Are you, any notable places you're speaking to about the book?
Actually, every stop was just great. I don't we just drove back, my partner and I, from Salem yesterday. That's a pretty notable place. Although I will say this, walking around town, you would think these people never saw a witch before. I mean, the amount of stairs and everything, I was like, wow, it's actually a pretty conservative area. I didn't know that.
It's a hilarious juxtaposition. I'm from New Hampshire and spent a fair amount of time at the OTO facility there, at their old location. I don't know what the new spot's like, but it was really interesting to spend a lot of time in Salem in my developmental stages.
Oh, so you were a member of KTO?
No. I switched over to the Portland, Maine chapter after Salt Lake.
Oh.
And I haven't really been in touch with any of those folks in good 10 years, maybe.
Oh, sure. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I still follow them online and am jealous I'm not going to events, but that's about it.
Yeah, I still sleep on their couches.
Awesome. Yeah, I love some of those people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's great you were able to do that. I love that city, and it's an interesting spot. Apparently, the actual epicenter of all the supposed burnings was actually a town or two over, like Salem. I think it was in Gloucester, but it was Salem at the time, and they carved out that zone.
Sure.
I think decades ago there was an International Transpersonal Psychology Association meeting in Gloucester, and that was one of the coincidences they discussed in the book, which is interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, so let's talk about before we dig into the book. Let's talk about you. What's your background, Tom?
With like,
broad question, right? Like you're a historian, you translate
Sure.
Latin. You're an occult scholar and writer. You've written three? I know of 3 books you've written. Have you written more?
I've written 4 books, but 3 in the psychedelic and magic realm. My first book was that's a great place to start on my background. So I come from a roller derby background. I've been involved in roller derby since 2005, and I spent the years 2005 to 2012 dressed up like a banana as a banana mascot, touring the roller derby underworld, picking up all these different stories and happenings and watching this revolution in women's sports just from the seeds crop up through the soil and grow into this global phenomenon it is. And so my first book is called Roller Derby, A Sensation That Caused a Book. Confessions of a Roller Derby Mascot is about the roller derby community and, my times within it. And then after that, I got into, psychedelic history. And so I wrote The Witch's Ointment, and then I wrote Psychedelic Mystery Traditions and Microdosing Magic.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's cool to see that you've bounced between publishing houses too. A lot of people just get locked into something like Inner Traditions, which is okay. But I was happy to see that you made this one on your own, this Microdosing Magic book.
Yeah, well, that's part of Sanctum Psychedelica is a publishing house as well. So it was published through Sanctum.
Oh, that's wonderful. And that's pretty much a big psychedelic club in Portland, or is there a different way to look at that?
Yeah, it's a psychedelic meetup group, very large one, because Portland is just like, it is like the hotspot for psychedelic activity right now. As far as the people that are giving talks, they're having the first conference. The Psychedelic Society of Portland is having a conference on October 27th, and Paul Stamets, the great Paul Stamets, was just there speaking on 9/20. So yeah, Portland is really just it's an amazing place for the psychedelic renaissance.
I would agree. There's a lot of controversy around some of the folks in Portland, and some of the people actually have a great reputation. So that I think is a good making for a dynamic culture. So it's happy to hear it. So microdosing magic, like obviously microdosing is great. It does look boring here and there. I don't agree. Like there are some things in there about Jonathan Thompson saying it's missing the point, where I'm like, I don't really know. This is like missing the point of a shovel, Like there's there's plenty of reasons to do psychedelics, and you don't have to be a counterculture weirdo or be trying to achieve enlightenment to get a benefit, right? Almost anybody can.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I like Jonathan a lot. He's a good friend of mine. I'm actually going to see him this Friday, heading over to Ann Arbor.
Oh, great.
And, yeah, we're the two queers of the psychedelic renaissance, right? So, Yeah, and look, I respect his perspective very much. I don't obviously agree with it, but I'm hoping that this book will actually serve as a counter to that, because the truth is his opinion is actually the majority opinion. I think that because you and I come from magical backgrounds first, we're all about, the experiment and, doing, what works for you, what kind of magical ideas and philosophies work for you. Whereas if you don't have that, it's easy to fall into that kind of philosophy that Thompson has. And, he's not alone. Again, a lot of people are really on that side of the coin. I think that, we should be using, psychedelics, especially when it comes to creative and compassionate entrepreneurs. I mean, because we're in the digital age, entrepreneurs, this is like, and especially psychedelic entrepreneurs, like we really have the chance to offer a new paradigm that, is against, as Hunter S. Thompson would put, all things old and evil.
Right. Right. And I say psychedelic weirdo lovingly. I have a lot of friends that are super weird.
Oh, yeah. No, and, he and I are both psychedelic weirdos. There's no doubt about that.
And I like Jonathan. We've had a couple conversations. But I think you're right. Because, studying magic, you have to be super flexible philosophically. And
yes, exactly.
There's almost no room for a hard line.
No.
Yeah, which is tough. Because we always want that hard line. We're like, I don't believe in Jesus, but all of a sudden you have to play with his metaphysic. It's like, oh, damn it. Like, I didn't really want to do that.
No, but it's good. But that's ultimately what mind expansion is all about, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I always come back to the Robert Anton Wilson reality tunnels thing, because it seems to be the most easy to discuss framework.
I'm not familiar.
Oh, well, reality tunnels and belief systems. So, everybody has BS, a belief system. And then
yes.
Reality tunnels are things like, the Marxist sunglasses, the capitalist sunglasses, the feminist sunglasses, like all these little glasses that, then give you a worldview that you are playing with.
Sure.
As opposed to, having 40 pairs of sunglasses in your jacket, and you can flip between all of them and have a more complete understanding and critique of a situation, which it sounds like you got from our capitalist discussion, capitalism, spirituality. Like it's really hard to get these firm answers that people are telling us we have. Yeah,
those 40 glasses, that's the nuance that we were talking about before we went on air. Exactly. It's just the truth is in the nuance. Truth is never found in the extremes. So why people go right to the extremes first, I'll never understand. But you're never going to find it there. It's in the details, and it's in the nuance.
Right. So microdosing, I think, is a tool, before we even bring in magic, that helps people become, I think, like you said in your book, a little more childlike, a little more of a genius. And, that in and of itself, I think, helps quite a bit. But then we add in the fantastic magic stuff. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, that was, I was just agreeing. I was smiling politely and agreeing along. That's all.
So let's talk a little bit about magic, because I haven't really discussed it in theory or practice much on the show. So let's maybe how do you model this for the psychedelic audience?
Sure. Okay. So I think that what microdosing magic, at its base, what I'm offering are templates for people so that they can kind of fill in the guts of what works for them. I'm big into naturalistic occultism. I think that magic is far more powerful when, it's personal. The more personal your symbols and your magical techniques are, the more powerful they will be. So with my book, I'm not so much telling people what to do. I never tell anybody what to do. It actually goes against everything I believe in to mess with somebody's will. But what I am offering is just some insights and say, hey, look, these are the things that I do. They're working for me. Try them. Don't try them. Modify them. Don't modify them. Whatever you want to do. But just, it's like using those techniques, I finished 2 books this year, and my partner and I are now about to win a Guinness World Record. And that's just all from using these microdosing magic techniques. And ultimately, the difference between microdosing and microdosing magic is the difference of a healthy diet and exercise. both those things by themselves are very good for you. So if microdosing is like a healthy diet, that's great. And if magic and witchcraft is like exercise, that's great. And you can have a healthy diet without exercise and exercise without a healthy diet. But what happens when you put healthy diet together with exercise? You have something far more powerful than those two things could have been by themselves. That's how microdosing magic works. Microdosing is a great tool. It's as good as a healthy diet. But again, if you want the most out of it, microdosing magic is the way to go, because it's the mind hacking. And I think, we say, Joe, you and I say the word magic and people might cringe. And it's like, well, what we're actually saying is mind hacking, reframing, and neurogenesis. That's what we're actually talking about. We call it magic, but it's neurogenesis.
Yeah, for sure. And what we might not communicate well to the general public is that this stuff has been going on for a long time. There's a really long tradition of this. And, perhaps if if you want to put it in a material, you can frame this stuff however you want. If there's a real materialist bent that you're working with, perhaps you're just coding your subconscious for later results.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and there's 100 different ways to discuss that, as we see all too often in our circles. But, you can have any excuse you want. But I really like how you talked about these 4 powers.
4 gifts, yes.
4 gifts. Could you kind of run through those real quick?
Sure, of course. So the 4 gifts make up like the beginning of my personal magical system. And I should let your listeners know that this book it's all my original magical system that I've cultivated over a lifetime. So there are certain things within it that you be like, well, that doesn't work. It's like, well, because it's not your magical system. It's not, I am a member of the OTO, but very little of ceremonial magic plays into my magical system, just as an example. So, sorry, back to your question, with the 4 gifts. So with the system, there are 4 gifts. 3 of those gifts, intellect, emotion, and will, come to us as a result of our birth from the cosmos. Sure your listeners are familiar with Carl Sagan's famous line when he says the cosmos are within us. We are a way for the universe to know itself. I agree totally with that. I like to think of us as microdoses of that cosmic magic. So because we are microdoses of that cosmic magic, we received 4 immaterial gifts: intellect, emotion, and will. However, due to our evolution in physical bodies, we also inherited a 4th gift, which is action, our ability to manipulate our intellect, emotion, and will into something tangible and positive, or negative if that's your thing. But, I like to, make it into stuff that's positive. And what I find is that when you align, everything that you are, everything that makes you tick can be broken down to your intellect, emotion, and will, and some variation 2 or all 3 of those. And then you have action on top of it, which is our presentation of our intellect, emotion, and will. And what my magical system is all about is aligning your intellect, emotion, and will with each other so that when you take action, everything you do comes off as nothing short of pure magic.
Yeah. I definitely can feel that. And you've got to be a little careful with what you're choosing to work on too, because this stuff is a little bit more real than you might think.
Yes, that's another thing. But I'm hoping that through microdosing magic, people that are into psychedelics or not into psychedelics or magic that start microdosing do come to realize that magic is far more powerful. It's not this silly little, thing that happens at Disney World. Like, magic is a very real force, and it's a very real force that every single one of us is born with the ability to tap into. That's actually a word is known as orenda, is the magic that you're born with. So it's, just to be careful with this stuff. My particular system is very, it's more for a general audience. I'm going to write a second book with my partner where we get, way deeper into it, way more into the occult stuff, than microdosing magic is, because it's really just more of a primer for people that are either microdosing and want to get the most out of their dose, or haven't started microdosing and are curious about it, or are curious about psychedelic magic. And, it's really for those people to kind of see, so that they can see what it is we're doing and, get the same benefits in life that I feel I'm getting. I don't want to just hoard this stuff. I want everybody to be happy. I want everybody to live fulfilled lives. And so, this book, Microdosing Magic, and, if I'm not, too forward about it, is my own little small contribution to helping a better world.
And I think it's going to catch on, at least in smaller circles, and then it'll spread out because, people are already doing, I think people don't necessarily realize what they're doing often, but they are doing weird magical practices. If you're practicing Catholic, you're doing weird magical stuff. If you're in yoga class, you are.
I had a friend who, she's awesome. And, she's like against magic, like a hardcore material reductionist. And yet she has a lucky hat. And every Tuesday at an open mic, actually going to go there tonight, she would always wear this and but you have a lucky hat. She's like, I have to have my, things are going to go wrong. I'm like, you're talking about magic right now. Like, you're literally using the hat to frame your night. That's magic, baby. That's what we're talking about. So I think a lot of it is that people have, just not the sharpest view of what magic is about. So, that's why the first chapter in Microdosing Magic is just kind of like a magic 101 for people to be like, hey, this is not this scary, creepy enterprise engaged in by guys with black ponytails and, in dark crypts and like claw rings and, painted nails and fangs. I mean, people, it's for anybody. Magic is for anybody that recognizes their own power and wants to harness that power to make their lives and the world around them a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. So the foundations are that there's a fair amount of neurogenesis that happens when psilocybin and psilocin interact with your brain. Same thing with the active compounds in lion's mane, which is pretty incrable. I think we should probably all be doing lion's mane regardless at this point.
Yeah, lion's mane and reishi is the other one.
Reishi, I forgot about. I always forget about that one. Paul Stamets seems to put that one a little bit on the back burner, but it's still one of his favorites, I think.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's the lion's mane because I just like the pun of the serpent and the lion's mane.
I like it. Just regenerating neurons, remyelinizing. I don't know what the mechanism is with psilocybin, but I assume it's somewhat similar.
The same remyelinization. It's the same. It does the same thing that the lion's mane and the reishi do.
Right, and just better firing. It's like going from a dial-up to cable.
And it's also, again, it's the reframing that helps with it. Like, so you can use, if you're just microdosing, you're going to see all the benefits from microdosing: creativity, mood enhancement, more energy. But if you want to actually create those new neural pathways in your brain, Microdosing Magic is the way to go. Like, well, you read the book. Like, I have that chapter on how I used Microdosing Magic to quit coffee. And I know that there are many things that you could be addicted to, but I was very, very, very addicted to coffee, and I haven't had a cup of coffee in now 8 months, and that's because I used Microdosing Magic to build new neural connections in my mind where I don't need coffee anymore. So that's what we mean by magic, folks. You can do it. Anybody could do this stuff. It's not, anybody could do it.
Yeah, I think about my coffee addiction here and there. Your book definitely gave me pause. I was like, do I want to quit this? Do I not? I don't know.
The slave to the devil's bean. No longer am.
I had to slow down. I'm no longer using a pot. I'm doing like 1 cup at a time. Thank God. I pretty much OD'd for a few months in a row.
I used to literally, Joe, pour if I could crawl out of bed in the morning, I would dump 7-8 cups of coffee into the machine and then pull out the coffee. I didn't even put it in a mug. I just drank it straight from the coffee pot. Look, dude, I did that twice a day for 20 years. That's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I just love it. Unfortunately, as soon as it becomes a problem, I'll reevaluate.
For me, it was a problem though. It was just I was irritable if I didn't have coffee, and I also find that I wake right up in the morning. Waking up, it used to be this arduous, groggy, death-like process, like you literally resurrecting from the dead. And now when I wake up, I just wake up. That's it. And, maybe I need 5 minutes, and, maybe I'm a little crabby sometimes, but mostly I just get right up and can go.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now adding the magic in is interesting because there's this idea of like sigils that you play with, and it seems to expand onto the like calendaring, which is really cool. I love how you laid that out too. And it's like a interesting mythopoetic playing almost, which is kind of back to your original point about childlike awareness from microdosing. So I liked that reflective kind of circular thing you put in there.
Well, it's just that, kid, there was that George Land study that's in the book. That all these 5-year-olds, 98% of them scored in the creative genius category for a test developed by NASA, where 1,600, it was a 31-year-olds or 32-year-olds were given the same test, and only 2% scored in the creative genius category. So that, that says a lot about just the creative genius we all had as children, and how, really our modern education system kind of, robs that from us over time, and through no fault of teachers, I might say. I have many teacher friends, and I was a former professor myself, and I give it up to these teachers because it's not them. They're fighting against a bureaucracy that threw them overboard a long time ago, and a lot of these education programs that these people buy, it's just cronyism. They're just buying these plans, these education models that don't work from their buddies. It's a shame, really. So we have to do the work to educate ourselves. It's up to us to educate ourselves at this point in time. And it's good that the internet is here because that helps. But at the same time, you have to use the internet wisely, not foolishly, or else you're going to de-educate yourself.
Absolutely. What have been some interesting questions people have asked you on tour so far? Anything stand out?
Most people on tour, the interesting questions. Most people ask me about dose sizes and stuff like that, and whether or not, like, if they have this or that condition. It's mostly more of safety questions than anything else, and which I'm always happy to field. Of course, I want everybody to stay safe when working with these medicines, but those are the questions that come up the most. As I had somebody ask me, and I'm not going to get into what her condition was because I don't want to betray our conversation, but she asked me about this thing, and she said, would microdosing help with that? And I had to say, sadly, I don't think it will. Or at least I haven't seen any studies about it, and I've never heard of it helping with this particular condition that you're talking about. And, you never want to say that, you always want to give good, helpful advice, but at the same time, you want to make sure you're giving safe advice as well.
Right. Absolutely. I'm in that position quite a bit. People are always asking me, number one, for drugs, and then number two, like for some other stuff. And it's complicated. Like, I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, and I say that to them, like, look, I have some studies. Like, I'm not a doctor, but I can read a study and tell you what it says. But it really is all in there. And if you're a healthy person, without any heart conditions, if you're not on SSRIs, things like that, then really microdosing is relatively safe for you. My friend Hawkeye would point out, and I think this is as good a thing to go on as any. If you wouldn't take a psychedelic dose, don't start microdosing.
Yeah, the same phenomena probably will end up happening over time.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you're microdose, you're still exciting your central nervous system the way it's excited with a higher dose. You're just not getting, you're not just opening portals or whatever. Although sometimes with the proper meditation and, microdosing, you could definitely, access the more other dimensional realm of things. But, I don't get into too much of that in the book because I know, that might be above what a lot of people are into with microdosing. I just wanted to, give them some advice on what's worked for me, because I've actually been microdosing for about 20 years, or I shouldn't say that. I started microdosing 20 years ago, stopped, and then in the past few years started again. And so I've had many years of trial and error to determine, what works and what doesn't. So the book Microdosing Magic is, again, it's like, hey, this is what's worked, this is what doesn't, over about 20 years. Like when I first started microdosing, there wasn't even a term microdosing. It didn't even exist yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fact that you were doing it, you said you started in your teens?
Yeah, but I was about 18, 19 years old. So pretty much, Joe, what it comes down to is this. We didn't call it microdosing. We called it being broke. We could only afford 1/8 or like 1 tab of acid among 4 of us or whatever. So we had to split it up. And we very quickly noticed, it wasn't really microdosing. It was more threshold dosing, which is, a little bit more than a microdose. It was more in that realm. And so we were feeling, the effects of it and way more energy. Like I started writing far more songs. Like I couldn't put my guitar down. And all these years later, I find out, because it helps with creativity. It sparks that creative impulse, and it's like, it's always cool when you're seeing science come around and like demonstrate something that you knew from 20 years ago, but you had no idea how to explain it. So it's really cool. It's a really great time to be alive for Microdosing Magic.
Right. Mushrooms have never been easier to grow. Drugs have never been easier to obtain safely. So it's pretty, great time for this psychedelic and microdosing renaissance.
Yeah, and the pendulum is swinging our way. I mean, cannabis is now legal in 13 states. The FDA just approved mushrooms for PTSD up in Canada. I think they're up to phase 3 testing with MDMA. So, the whole doom and gloom of the 60s, 70s, that whole thing, like, I think that it's very important for the psychedelic renaissance to get out of that. I mean, I go to conferences sometimes and people will like speak as if we're still in the dark ages of like, authoritarianism and psychedelic. We're not at all. I mean, come on. When Clinton was in office and Jerry Garcia died, he put the flag at half-mast. I mean, give me a break. It's not, it's not this highly, authoritarian thing anymore because all the hippies had kids, and now all those kids are in, these government offices. So it's a good thing. We won. The good guys are winning. We should celebrate.
Right. And let's talk about that a little bit, or unpack what you kind of state in your book a little bit. Like, let's unleash the creatives, the compassionate folks out there, by microdosing. That's kind of what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's happening in Silicon Valley, and I'm sure it's happening in other places. I bet you anything there are people in Congress or in D.C. that are microdosing. I mean, obviously they can't say it, but I mean, I bet you they are, because those, a lot of them are taking like pharmaceuticals for some. What's that guy, Rush Limbaugh? I mean, he's just a radio asshole. Oh, can I say that?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, so he's just like a radio asshole that's like addicted to all, these horrible pharmaceuticals. Like, and it's a shame because somebody like that might be just like his head is so far up his ass. It's like, hey, here's some mushrooms that are safe. They're straight from Gaia's womb right to your soul. And it's like, but maybe they won't try it. But I bet other people in D.C., maybe more on the liberal side, are, but they just can't talk about it. In fact, when I was just in Salem yesterday, because, believe it or not, it's such a conservative place, as you might well know, even though on the outside it might not look like that. It was the first time I ever gave a talk that there were no questions at all at the Q&A. And I was like, oh my God, do these people just totally hate what I said? And then after the talk, everybody came up to me privately and asked me their question. And it was like, it was interesting because I thought I was like, wow, did I ever just bomb? Like, nobody has any questions. I mean, I walked off the stage feeling pretty defeated, actually. And, one by one, people were coming up to me saying, like looking around, making sure, looking over their shoulders, like, hey, so what about this? And it's like one right after the other. So, perhaps it's going on in DC and perhaps it's going on in other conservative areas. But people are saying, look, the good news is the science, all of it, 100% of it is on our side. All of it. Whether you're the Johns Hopkins study with Roland Griffin, or if you're at UCLA with Charles Grobe, if you're at NYU, what they did the end of life cancer studies, the name of the doctors that ran it escape me at present, but I mean, at Harvard, you have Lester Greenspoon. He's the chair of the Harvard Medical School is saying these things are medicines. Like, come on.
It's coming. It is inevitable. And you're right. Like we are winning.
Yeah, we're winning. So we got to get past the whole doom and gloom thing. And that definitely is there. And it should definitely stay in the back of our minds as just a reminder, like absolutely. But I think we really need to start, focusing our energy not on, well, how do we make this acceptable to people? But hey, you know what? People are starting to accept us. Let's make sure we're giving them the best information possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Your line about Salem was funny to me. I recall Tim Leary making some kind of jokes about Massachusetts. Obviously, he was a Harvard guy.
Yes.
Spent a lot of time in the Northeast, and it's Massachusetts, and specifically where Harvard is, like one of the most liberal towns in the U.S. next to probably Berkeley and San Francisco. So having that juxtaposition of like liberal attitudes, but not willing to like save face, just kind of or risk face, I guess.
Yeah,
is
of course.
Just hilarious to me because I grew up with it. It's like, okay, you don't want to look silly, but you're going to be quiet. It's like, yeah, it's funny because Terry Gross is never going to teach them about that. They have to like read your book or like talk to you.
I hope they do read my book, and I'd love anybody to talk to me about it.
So again, I really enjoyed it. And it's not that long of a book. What, 130 pages?
But it packs a punch.
Yes. Yeah. I blasted through it. Thankfully, I had some time to do that over the weekend, and I had a really great time reading it. So it's playful, inspiring. I'll probably at least take a couple of things to heart. I liked how you formulated stuff. It was not threatening like some magic can be. It was pretty open and easy, which is a cool style.
Yeah, well, we're not going to, I'm all about community building. And so I find that if you scare people, it just is not conducive to building community. My partner and I and the Sanctum Psychedelica, we often talk about, how like the death of the village, and that's where the problem is, that we don't have these, these villages of support anymore. And, and that's why I think community is so important, because communities have replaced the village support. And, just that, we're all born a little weird, and, it can be very disconcerting sometimes, and maybe you feel like an outcast. But, what I'm hoping, again, this book also does is say to people, look, you're just fine the way you are. Like you're not crazy. You're just magical, and, and you got to harness it a little more maybe, but there's nothing actually wrong with you. And it's like, I'm saying that from personal experience. I mean, I spent the first, 18, 19 years of my life thinking I was totally wrong, and then I ate some mushrooms. I'm like, I'm not wrong. I'm just a witch, like that's all. Just nobody, nobody explained that to me as a kid. Like there wasn't the village to come and say, hey, Tom, it's okay. You're just a queer little tree hugging guy worshiping witch, and that's fine. And so that's why communities are so important. And with Sanctum Psychedelica, that's where our main focus is, community building.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that too. I think that's been a big theme in a lot of our past episodes is let's just build that community again. Alienation is really our disease du jour. And
yes.
Building community, starting up clubs, hanging out at clubs, is a great way to protect yourself and heal quite a bit.
Absolutely. And also to integrate, profound experiences. It's very important.
Absolutely.
Because you'll have, we're, psychonauts, so it's a little different, but, there are stories of people, they go to Peru, they take ayahuasca, they have this amazing, beautiful experience. And, because they didn't have that mystical framework, they come back to their regular lives and they're like, well, now what? And that's why community integration is so important, so that they see, oh, you're not alone. Like we're trying to all build this together, because, the world needs us right now more than it ever has before to really come together. And now that, we are getting some leniency with psychedelics with the FDA and also whatever their governing bodies are in Canada, now this is really the time to push and make sure that the information that we're giving, the techniques we're offering, and the methods we're using are both valuable and work to reduce harm, which is so important.
Yes. Reducing harm is huge. Figuring out a leverage point to allow more drug testing would be huge. I'm sure in Portland, which is kind of a notorious heroin town, would be really benefited by supervised injection sites and legalized heroin. A lot less people would die and get infections, and it would really reduce costs and harms.
Yeah, in both in Zurich where they tried it and Insight up in Vancouver. I mean, the numbers don't lie. I mean, deaths are down, HIV is down, addiction, is down as well, because they're with healthcare professionals who are trained to not just help you physically, but also help you emotionally and spiritually and mentally. And it's heroin addiction is a horrible, horrible demon. I've never experienced it, but I can only empathize with it. And other things, like I'd love to see ayahuasca clinics and ibogaine clinics, because people are really showing a lot of success with when it comes to really hard addictions like heroin, cigarettes, things like that, that are just no good for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Coming soon to a future near you, I hope.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, there's last year, Mark Hayden, I should say, up at MAPS Canada, his presentation at Spirit Plant Medicine Conference to this day has been my favorite presentation I've ever seen at a conference, because it was all about the future of psychedelic therapy. I would all have heard about it, and we'd all discussed it with our friends and colleagues, but I'd never actually seen a blueprint for it. And this guy, it's so great. I don't know if it's on YouTube or not, but I would encourage all your listeners to check out the Mark Hayden's talk on the future of psychedelic psychotherapy. It'll blow your mind. It's so cool.
I'll have to try to find that and link that in the show notes. I don't follow. I wish I did spend more time following what the Canadians are up to. They are far more tolerant up there than down here. And it seems like they're super, science oriented. And there's less politics messing with their science. It's still happening. But
yeah, of course. Yeah, I think, though, with the cannabis industry, there's a little bit of a hubbub up there because the government is getting involved or whatever. And I mean, I am all for, legalizing cannabis, but I'm always going to buy directly from my farmer. And I know that not everybody has that option, but, it's just I support the farmers, and I support any cannabis that has no government anything to do with it. And I'm certainly not going to buy any cannabis that Gene Simmons has anything to do with. So, support your local farmers.
Gene Simmons is aligned with a cannabis brand?
Yeah, so Gene Simmons from Kiss, the arguably one of the most horrible rock bands ever exist, who has been so anti-cannabis and just,
Has he?
Oh, yeah, just all the stupid, it rots your brains, at this, that, you can't, and now he's, getting in on the cannabis industry, and it's like, no, thank you, buddy.
Looks like he just took a $2.5 million endorsement to promote cannabis. That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's I don't know. It seems very I shouldn't say. I don't know where his heart is. I can't read his heart or his head. But to go from anti-cannabis to supporting cannabis without so much as an apology and saying, hey, you know what? I was wrong about all this. I don't know. That just, I can't, I find it hard to respect that.
I'm okay with it. I'm still mad at the guys in Metallica over the Napster thing. So in music piracy. Yeah. So it's very different, but still there's some lines like that are, similar maybe.
Yeah, it was new technology at the time. I think that they all, and it wasn't Metallica, a lot of guys. Dr. Dre was also very against Napster. And I think the only person that actually embraced it was Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins. He really embraced streaming music and Napster and all that stuff. But they all were against it. And they saw what happened to Lars Ulrich from Metallica, so they all just zipped their lips. But, a lot of them were against it. And it was a very challenging time. I don't judge people for wanting to protect their art. I really don't. So it's, I think they have more than enough money. I don't, see why he had to be such a baby about it. But, as far as, not wanting songs that weren't finished, leaked out. I mean, I could understand that. I'm totally with him on that. I wouldn't want a halfway done song leaked out to millions of people that actually, since millions of people have never heard any of my stuff, I would be happy for millions of people to hear a half-done song I wrote. But you know what I'm saying? You know, like, for them, a big band that puts, $1 million production behind, a song, like, you know, and as an artist, you want a person to hear the final product. Like, I can understand that. I really can. Again, I don't think you have to be such a baby about it. But from an artistic perspective, I get it. From a financial perspective, it's like, dude, take your limo back to one of your mansions and go in your pool. Like, come on. Like, nobody's stealing from you. These are the people that made you who you are, and you're still selling albums anyway. And it's not like Napster's, you're not going to go broke because of Napster. Just stop. But again, artistically, I get it.
Yeah, for sure. I think the analogy maybe to the drug war is that these people we're okay putting people in jail for stuff like this. And I just think anybody that's okay putting another human in a cage has got a fundamental issue. Especially when it's nonviolent. Yeah, especially for cannabis. I mean, let's talk about how racist the drug war is to start with, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. So, for people to, for me anyway, and maybe this might not jive with some of your listeners, but to support the drug war is to support racism in a very real way. And so for me, that's also, a kind of a problem I have with people that were so pro-drug war and now we're pro-cannabis. It's like, well, how about all those fathers that are missing their sons that you threw in prison for having a joint? Why don't you let them out of the cage? How about? Like, I don't want to hear, like, how about that as a good start? It's ridiculous. It's been coming up quite a bit on the show, is that we really do need to get these people out of jail as soon as possible after the state has, legalized. There's no reason. Yeah, but the problem, Joe, is that technically, and I'm by no means a law scholar, but I do know this, ignorance of the time of committing a crime, let me rephrase that. If you commit a crime that one day it becomes not a crime to do, it doesn't matter. You're still held responsible for the time that, was judged upon you. Now, I think that that's ridiculous when it comes to cannabis and actually all substances, because these people need help. They don't, especially like a heroin addict. We were talking about Insight and these heroin clinics. That's what an addict needs. They don't need to be thrown into prison with murderers and rapists. They need help from doctors, and they need compassion and love from people that care. Like, that's what's going to help them. Prison doesn't help anybody. Right. Absolutely. It was like that movie Blow with Johnny Depp. He said, there's that line, he says, prison is the worst place for a drug dealer. I entered prison with an undergraduate degree in cannabis and walked out with a PhD in cocaine. And they're not wrong. Even in county prisons anywhere, you're going to learn all about the meth trade, best spots to score, and whatever. Well, a lot of the times it's the correctional officers that are getting their kickback, and they're letting it into the prisons. They know what's going on, but they're getting their kickback, and it's good for crowd control as well. So there was that guy that's a violent criminal. Let him shoot up in his cell. Maybe he'll overdose and we don't got to deal with him anymore. Instead of giving the guy the help he needs, just let him sit in a cage, shoot up heroin instead. That's horrible. Yeah, it's really inappropriate. It is, and it's so anti-human. It's anti-human. It's like, how does that not sit in your conscience and rot your soul doing that? Like, I don't know about other people, but when I do something wrong, like, I know, like, my conscience is very loud about it. And it's a really good, prevention, for doing anything wrong. It's just like, don't you get that visceral feeling inside? And on the other side, don't you get that warm sunshine feeling when you do something right and you do something good and you help? Like, this is basic human equipment we're all supposed to be born with. 5% of the population is sociopaths. I think that's the number. And that's all it takes to really let some dark stuff in. Absolutely. Thankfully, we don't have to be afraid of it too much. You just got to stay on your toes a bit. And I'm going to real quick apologize to your listeners. I know I'm getting a little bit loud here, but just this whole war on drugs thing and the underlying racism behind all of it and the way it breaks up families and tears people apart.
it really bothers me. So I'm sorry if I'm coming off a little strong here.
No, not at all. I'm quite anti-drug war. I think everybody knows it. But you're handling
impacts
like to families over generations. It's not just like arrest the perpetrator and the immediate family being impacted. It's like 5 generations till they recover back to baseline financially.
If they ever do recover back to baseline financially. But you're 100% correct, man. It's just you're right. And that's a very important part. It is a generational thing. Like, kids need their parents. They need them. And especially, like, I understand if one of the parent is doing something horrible and is committing an actual crime. But I mean, come on, smoking a joint, on your front porch after a long day of work. I'm sorry, I fail to see where the crime is in any of this.
Right. I want to draw some analogies to some Catholic stuff around ointments and whatnot, but we can probably skip that.
Oh, we can get into it. Whatever you want.
I'd like to actually, we don't have infinite time, unfortunately, but let's chat a little bit about the Amanita and the true history of Christian psychedelia, if you're ready to jump from microdosing.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'd love to talk about that. So I go over, in my new book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, I try to correct the record on on Christian psychedelic history. Right now, the predominant paradigm is the holy mushroom, or the mushroom and Christian art paradigm, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Joe, and I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with. But the truth is, when you go back and actually look at the sources, there's no truth to any of it. There are no mushrooms in Christian art. Sorry to be the one to say that, but there aren't. People really, they don't know what they're looking at. They're not New Testament historians. They're not Christian art historians. They're not even regular art historians. And it's easy, and I can understand, because I used to buy the whole Christian psychedelic or the Christian magic mushroom thing. In my early 20s, I totally bought it. But, and so much so that I wanted to write a book on it. But as I went and did the historical research, I found out that there was nothing to it. And one of those things that I talk about in Psychedelic Mystery Traditions is actually debunking the whole Amanita muscaria mushroom Santa Claus thing, if you're familiar with that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, everyone. Most psychonauts are familiar with it. And the truth is, there is no connection whatsoever to Siberian shamans or flying reindeers in like to the modern day Santa Claus. There's totally different historical lines that have created our modern idea of Santa, and nothing of it has to do with the Amanita muscaria. Now, the main point of evidence, and I don't really consider it evidence, but those who subscribe to the theory would call it evidence, is they say, well, look at Santa Claus's outfit. It's red and white. And look at the Amanita muscaria. It's red and white. I'm sure you're familiar with that as well, yes?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the problem is they haven't actually, learned their history, especially about where Santa's outfit comes from, because the red and white from Santa's outfit, and I demonstrate this conclusively in my new book, actually comes from the American flag. One of the earliest pictures of Santa Claus on American soil comes from Harper's Weekly, and I believe it was 1863. I think it was 1860. It was during the Civil War. And it's the cover of Harper's Weekly, and what they do is it's Santa Claus giving provisions to Union soldiers so that they could fight against, the injustices, the evil injustices of slavery. Now, in this image, it's black and white, of course, but Santa has star-spangled trousers on, and his jacket is striped, and above him is flying the American flag, and it's like the artist was clearly, Thomas Ness was the artist, was clearly contrasting Santa with the flag. That's where the red and white actually comes from. Now, years later, when Coke, when Coca-Cola adopted Santa Claus as their spokes elf, they dropped the blue from the outfit because they had already been advertising in red and white for, a while now. So there's actually, it's just, there's a nuance there, again, to bring back up nuance that, we all want to believe, oh, yeah, there's a secret history of Santa Claus and mushrooms, because it's a very intriguing and attractive idea. But when you go back and look at the history, there's no validity to any of it. They'll also point to those postcards. Am I talking too much?
No, this is great.
Sorry. There were also those postcards from the early 1900s, and you can Google them, that clearly show mushrooms, clearly show Amanita muscaria mushrooms. No doubt about it. That has to be explained. But what people do erroneously, quite anachronistically, is they throw our modern idea of Santa's elves onto these elves. These elves, those elves in those cards have nothing to do with Santa Claus, and I would encourage the listeners to actually Google image search Amanita Mushroom Santa, and what you're going to see is not a single one of them is actually a Christmas card. They're all they're Germanic New Year cards. Christmas has nothing to do with any of them. Now, when you get to America, because it's America, we started adding, the Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. But when those cards first got here, people didn't even know what they meant. In fact, on all the earliest cards, you get mushrooms and also pigs, because both mushrooms and pigs are symbols of luck in Germanic areas, or at least they were in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Then the cards made it over to America, and while here they adopted new symbols of luck, which are four-leaf clovers and horseshoes. So you can actually date chronologically when these postcards were made based on whether they have only horseshoes or only pigs, only pigs or mushrooms, or later on pigs, clovers, horseshoes, and mushrooms. And I go over all that in the book. So anybody that's interested in this topic, I definitely offer a different perspective for seeing the history of the so-called psychedelic Santa. And I think it's important because there actually is a psychedelic history. There is a rich and vibrant psychedelic history. So much so that we don't have to go willy-nilly throwing these honestly nonsensical ideas onto the past just to make a point. There's plenty of evidence there. In my new book, I have 3 chapters on how ancient Christians use psychedelics. None of it has anything to do with painting them in art, because nobody was ever painting mushrooms into Christian art. But, there's more than enough. And let me say, had they been painting mushrooms into Christian art, I would have, exposed that in my book. I want to know the truth about this stuff, but there isn't any truth to any of it.
Fascinating. Because it's been such a long-running meme, I guess. I
have a video up on my YouTube page. If people want to check out the Psychedelic Witch YouTube page on the Psychedelic Santa, and, just read their arguments, listen to my argument. In my new book, I have a whole subchapter called The True History of Psychedelic Santa. So read mine, read theirs, and you tell me who actually has the history right.
You said you had some buy-in from Carl Ruck. Is that right?
I had what was that?
A buy-in, like he was into your idea around this, reforming it from the, I won't say his name.
Oh, yes. Yeah, he who shall not be named.
Right.
Well, no, what it is so since Carl Ruck is a scholar and he who shall not be named is just a computer repairman that is a conspiracy theorist, Carl Ruck is willing to change his mind. And so far on every single image of Christian art that is put forward to have mushrooms that I've challenged, Ruck has sided with me.
Yeah, that's really good. We'll probably have Ruck on in the next month or so. We meant to get him on for last December, but didn't end up happening. We'll do some follow-up on that for sure.
Yeah, and I have a lot of respect for Ruck. His new book, or his newest book, Dionysus and Thrace, I think is one of his best works. I agree with Ruck on a lot of stuff. It's just the Christian mushroom stuff where, he's so brilliant, and what he doesn't realize, because he uses linguistics to prove like the sacred mushroom theory, like right. John Mark Allegra. And what he doesn't realize is that it's like, dude, nobody in the first century was this smart. And nobody in the first century had this kind of etymological training and would have been able to code passages in the Bible in such a way. Like, you can do that because you're brilliant. Carl Ruck is one of the most brilliant people. That dude reads ancient Latin and ancient Greek the way you and I would read the funny papers. Like, he's brilliant. And even when I was writing The Witch's Ointment, I didn't publish anything without having his approval on my translations. Nothing, because he knows his stuff. Like, especially when it comes to language, ancient Greek and Latin, he's a genius with it. And he's a genius all around. I just think that that's part of the problem. It's like, dude, nobody was this smart in the ancient world. They just weren't.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, like the evolution of consciousness over time. or I guess that might be a bad way of putting it, but what is the mind like of somebody in 100 AD or 100 BC relative to where we're at now?
They just didn't have universal education, man. That's all it is. It's like there was no university. You couldn't, go study Latin in one class and then go study, Sumerian etymology, which is what you have to know, to produce a theory like John Marco Allegro's or Carl Ruck's. And, the other thing that I'd like to point out that I don't think a lot of people know is that John Marco Allegro made up all of the crucial vocabulary needed to support his theory. If you look in The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, all the crucial words have the asterisk there, which is to say, I feel like we don't actually know what's going on here. It's like, well, if every single word that proves your theory right, you had to make up, what does that actually say about your theory? Again, yes, are there roots? Are there European roots between, Greek and Sumer and Latin? Of course there are. But did any Grecian studying at the polis know that? Of course not. It didn't work that way. We weren't there yet with our education.
Right.
More brilliant and the more detailed and the more just like intricate their theories are, the more it actually, they're digging their own grave. There's also the more images that they put forth. I mean, they're saying there are hundreds of mushrooms in art, and yet nobody ever mentions it anywhere in text. That doesn't make any sense.
For sure. Yeah, having it like it feeds into this like weird McKenna thing about priestcraft and hiding the mushroom and then losing the mushroom. But realistically, it doesn't make sense unless there's huge influence, and we would have heard about it. We've heard about Eleusis, and that was quite exactly. The secret.
Yes, exactly, and yet we still know about it. Conspiracies don't last. They really don't. Look how long Watergate lasted, and that was at the highest echelons of the most powerful government on the planet, and that still fell right through the cracks because conspiracies they don't work. And one of the problems with the theory also, you brought up Terence McKenna, is there's this whole idea of these priests hoarding the entheogens and keeping everybody else in the dark while they had the entheogenic enlightenment. That is total bullshit. In my book, these ancient Christian authors, especially the church fathers, wrote openly about their psychedelic experiences. They encouraged people to have psychedelic experiences. So if they're going to talk about things like cannabis, which they do, opium, which they do a lot, mandrake, which they do a lot, why wouldn't they talk about mushrooms as well? Well, because they weren't really painting them in art. That's, it would be like saying, the ancient Christian priests, they've always had Taco Bell. They just hoarded it to themselves. They didn't let anybody know about it. And that's why there's no Taco Bell in the historical record, until the modern age. Well, that's ridiculous. Where are the menus? Where is, a food eating contest? Where's, a Taco Bell sign? Where's a napkin with the Taco Bell logo on? Where's all the corroborating evidence to say that these priests were hoarding their Taco Bell? Well, just take that analogy and throw it onto the holy mushroom theory, and it's the same thing. There's just no truth to it.
I'd love to see you do a comic book on the holy mushroom and Taco Bell. I can really imagine.
I bring it up in my presentations, and a friend of mine who's actually an advocate of the theory, Jerry Brown, who's wrote, in my opinion, the best book on the topic called The Psychedelic Gospels. He and I have had 2 debates on this, and I would encourage your listeners to go to YouTube. It's on my page, Psychedelic Witch, and also, if you just type, if you can't find it, because I don't have that many subscribers, so it's a little difficult, but if you type in the search engine, Psychedelic Christianity, a scholarly debate, it'll come up, and I encourage all your listeners to give it a listen and let them make up their own minds of who's really got the truth here.
Well, it's compelling. Psychedelic Christianity, a scholarly debate.
Yeah.
Wow, I've never spelled words so poorly. Cool. Found it and will link to it. Cool.
Cool. Please do.
Yeah, well, okay, we're at about an hour here. Anything else you maybe want to put out? Yeah, psychedelics are a fantastic way to
change your mind and yourself, as the Michael Pollan book is titled, How to Change Your Mind. And magic is also a great way to develop containers for yourself, so that when you do have a harsh psychedelic experience, you're able to frame it in a different way. And that's mostly what magic, and especially psychedelic magic, is all about, is about being able to put new frames on your reality to change your life for the better.
Absolutely. Cool. And can you give us your websites and the names of
Sure.
your 3 or 4 books?
Sure, absolutely. My website is psychedelicwitch.com. I also have a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/the Psychedelic Witch. So Psychedelic Witch, but with a the in there. And Instagram is @witchydelic, WITCHYDELIC. And the names of my books are The Witch's Ointment, The Secret History of Psychedelic Magic, which is a book about the entheogenic religion of medieval wise women who were worshiping fertility goddesses, and how the Catholic Church demonized that into our popular idea of a witch, flying through the air to worship Satan. My other book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, which just came out, hot off the presses, is actually I go into what happened before the witch trials. I go into the ancient world and up into the witch trials. And also in one chapter, if The Witch's Ointment is a little long, I mean, it's highly academic. So if you're looking for an easier understanding of my overall thesis, you'll find it in a chapter called Wild and Weird in Psychedelic Mystery Traditions. It's just, I compacted it down to an easily digestible chapter for people. And of course, my other book, Microdosing Magic, a psychedelic spell book, is really just a way to, turn your life into magic and own your own light, to own your unique slice of the cosmos, you magical bastards.
Own it. Yes, that's exactly right. We do have to take control and ownership of our own lives. As much as that's not a popular sentiment, it's one of the most direct ways to get results.
Absolutely.
So Tom Hatsis, thank you again for joining us, and until next time.
Thank you, Joe, for having me.